Renters are having trouble staying in their homes. Why? With the average rent in Dayton at $1,100 per month and in Cincinnati $1,400, many more renters in both areas are spending a lot of their income, more than 30%, on housing. That means more than 40% of renters in both markets are cost-burdened or severely cost-burdened.
Rent is too high, and more people need to be lenient against people that's hardworking.
I wish there was more information available for tenants who are at the beginning, in the middle, even towards the end of an eviction process.
Every time I see something being built, it's something that, who affords that in Dayton, Ohio?
But landlords have rights too and need to be able to make money.
If you're a property owner and someone refuses to pay rent for whatever reason, circumstance, you try to work with them, but there can be a point where, if this is your livelihood, then you have to be able to evict people.
So what's the solution? To either keep people in their homes or negotiate a move without an eviction on their records. Cleveland and a handful of other cities have a plan in place.
We believe that having full representation for a right to counsel has been very important because we're able to dig into other pretty significant issues of poverty and justice by seeing that totality of a case.
Today on the pod, we're looking at the right to counsel, or the right of a tenant to have an attorney when facing eviction. Does it work? And is it worth it? Let's get into it. This is Brick by Brick, solutions for a thriving community.
Brick by Brick is made possible thanks to leading support from Deborah and Robert Chavez and Greater Cincinnati Foundation, with additional major support from AES Ohio Foundation, Lori Johnston, Susan Howarth Foundation, the George and Margaret McLean Foundation, Diane and Dave Moshe, the Dayton Foundation, the Robert and Adele Schiff Family Foundation, and more. Thank you.
Hi, and welcome to Brick by Brick, where we're highlighting solutions for a thriving community in Southwest Ohio. I'm your host, Ann Thompson. There are many challenges related to housing and housing stability, and that's where we're continuing to focus our coverage for the region. More and more people are renting, 61% in Cincinnati and 53% in Dayton, because buying a home is out of reach for many right now, and the rent keeps going up, an average 30% nationally since the pandemic. Peg Durkers is CEO of Bethany House, one of the only shelters for families in the area.
Families who are coming to us are earning more, so people are becoming homeless at higher and higher levels of income because rents are becoming so extraordinarily expensive.
According to the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio, the average Dayton renter has to earn nearly $19 an hour to afford a basic two-bedroom apartment. In Cincinnati, it's $21 an hour. Part of the problem is there aren't enough apartments. According to reporting from Dayton Daily News, there was a 38% drop in the number of new units coming on the Dayton market from last year to this year. A shortage of housing is also a problem in Cincinnati, where from 2010 to 2020, only a third of Cincinnati neighborhoods added housing, and some even lost housing. That's a problem because more than 90% of the current ones are occupied. As we told you in episode 3 on zoning, the city of Minneapolis has been building more apartments each year, and that's what has kept rents there basically flat for 7 years. But across the country and here in Southwest Ohio, the reality is evictions are rising.
9:30 eviction docket is now in session. The Honorable Magistrate Melissa West presiding.
After a pause during the pandemic, evictions have now surged back up. The Eviction Lab, a Princeton University-based research group tracking evictions nationwide, ranks Dayton 26th in the nation for having the most evictions. Cincinnati is 46th. Last year, there were approximately 6,500 eviction filings in Montgomery County and 13,000 in Hamilton County. Also of note in our area, Butler County had the second highest eviction rate in the state at 10 evictions filed for every 100 renters. And many agree that eviction rates are undercounted, possibly by as much as 40 to 50%, because not all evictions go through court. One Cincinnati woman we spoke with, who asked us not to share her name, had her lease terminated without warning over a year ago.
It was like the people that owned the property had the upper hand. You really didn't have any rights. If they wanted you off their property, they had the right to just say, we are no longer going to sign your lease.
And after a year of sleeping on relatives' and friends' couches, she is still looking for a home. Another important aspect to consider about this topic, when we talk about evictions, experts say it's children, Black women, and Latinx affected the most. Director of the Eviction Research Network, Tim Thomas, uses computer modeling to drill down. Much of his in-depth research has been centered in Seattle, which is mostly white. But even there, he saw the racial disparities.
Black and Latinx households that were there had, exorbitant amount of evictions. Black women in certain cases were facing eviction 7 times higher than white women, and Latinx households were facing eviction 40 times more.
Sinclair Community College sociology professor Kathy Rao partners with Thomas to document eviction filings by race. In Dayton, just like Seattle, Latinx experienced the most eviction filings, followed by Blacks. And she says there are health ramifications even if you aren't the person being evicted. Rao cites Ohio State research.
It shows the long-term mental health effects of families that even if you don't face an eviction, but living in a neighborhood with high eviction rates takes a mental health toll, especially on Black women and their children.
The study says it's especially harmful to pregnant women, who in this study suffered psychological distress 68% of the time. This kind of stress has long-term impacts for many parents and children, and even if you have good reason to fight an eviction, it can be overwhelming and confusing to navigate the court system. We go through it step by step on the Brick by Brick web pages. Check those out at CET and thinktv.org. A big advantage for landlords is that most have a lawyer representing them in court, and all LLCs, or landlords listed as limited liability companies, have to be represented per state law. But only about 10% of tenants have an attorney. Deborah Levy knows this statistic all too well. The senior attorney with Advocates for Basic Legal Equality, or ABLE, is preparing to start a Right to Counsel pilot program in Dayton.
Typically, in 90% of the cases, tenants, when they have a lawyer, they either win their case or they end up with a favorable outcome.
Right to counsel is the right to be represented by an attorney from start to finish in an eviction case. Levy knows one stumbling block to starting this program is cost.
Wouldn't cover all of Montgomery County, but would cover a segment of Montgomery County, and with the hope of growing that throughout the entire county.
Levy and Abel say with Right to Counsel, they hope to give some of the power back to the tenant that the landlord currently holds. Among the dozens and dozens of people going through eviction court every day in Southwest Ohio is one woman who told her story to Brick by Brick's Hearns Laguerre Jr., who joins me now. Hey, Hearns.
Yeah.
Hearns, so we've been talking about how Right to Counsel would or could help protect tenants' rights, but how?
Yeah, what difference does having a lawyer make for a tenant, right?
It could make a big difference.
Well, we can see that difference in the story of Alice Raymond. She's a Dayton resident who has dealt with housing insecurity and faced eviction filings firsthand before becoming a tenants' rights advocate herself. Let's take a listen. Alice Raymond, single mother of 4, takes a routine trip to feed some ducks with her kids, not too far from the house.
Try to keep some sort of routine to where it's some kind of normal, seeing as, like our housing situation haven't been so normal.
Alice had faced housing insecurity for years and was desperate to find a place to live for her family. In December of 2022, she found a duplex in Dayton, and when she tried to use her housing voucher, she ran into some complications.
So it didn't pass inspection from the outside. That meant for me is I couldn't use that voucher.
So to secure housing, Alice had no other choice.
I was already living in a hotel and spending, I'm talking like $1,500 a month just to stay housed. They offered me to pay the market price rent until they were able to pass inspection. I'd rather pay $900 than $1,500, and I took it.
But no major repairs were made, and the duplex never passed inspection.
Man, the conditions, where do I start? I mean, I had plumbing issues to where the toilet wouldn't flush, the tub wouldn't drain, and the sink wouldn't drain. I had some electrical issues. I had foundation issues as well. My front door didn't have a doorknob. Rodents, infestation. Oh, my basement would flood if it rained too hard because it didn't have a sump pump. Much more.
I'm curious how the kids would describe this space. Like, what were those conversations like?
They call it the bug house. A lot of questions. Why do we have this? Why is this not working? Like, whatever I went through, they went through as well.
Alice reached out to the landlord multiple times to make repairs, but they didn't happen. So she did what all tenants have the ability to do. She filed for rent escrow. That's when tenants pay rent into a court-held account until the landlord makes needed repairs.
Before I knew it, then came the eviction for non-payment. By that time, though, I had already paid like 2 months into the court. So I was confused why they were even able to process an eviction.
The courts ended up combining her escrow hearing with her eviction hearing. Initially, Alice didn't have any representation.
It was coming down to the wire, to the end, where I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be able to find any representation, so I need to be as prepared as I can be to go into the courtroom and represent myself. So that's what I was like, let me look up YouTube and see what I can find on YouTube.
But YouTube can't take you as far as a lawyer can. Through the Dayton Tenants Union, a grassroots group fighting for housing rights, she was able to connect with attorney Sarah Weber from ABLE, Advocates for Basic Legal Authority.
She was the answer to my prayers. Not only is she a bomb attorney and she knows that side, but she's here, she's real. and she understood what I was saying. She understood exactly what issues I was dealing with and how to go about it.
What difference does it make having a lawyer in the room representing a tenant versus a tenant who does not have a lawyer in the room?
It definitely gives the tenant a voice and a certain amount of respect. When Alice went to her first hearing, it was the second time that the landlord never showed up. And and if a tenant doesn't show up, for an eviction, they just grant the case. They don't continue it.
Sarah was able to help navigate the court proceedings.
There was technical issues with who was present because the landlord, the owner, is actually an out-of-state person. And they did not come. And they sent somebody who the attorney themselves didn't really know who they were. The company itself did not register to do business in Ohio, number one. And so there was so there was a lot of objection that way.
After going through hearings for a couple of months, Sarah was able to get Alice a favorable outcome.
The eviction was handled first because they dismissed, because she wasn't behind in rent. So escrow, you can request for all the conditions to be fixed. You can request to be let out of the lease early. So we had requested that the lease end, like she was given 30 days. She was able to stay in the property rent-free, have the rent escrow that she had escrowed released back to her, and then she moved out in December.
Do you think it would have been dismissed without Sarah Weber?
No.
Why is that?
I feel like they probably would have came up with another excuse or another reason. Even though it's not allowed, it would have been allowed, if I didn't have my representation.
If you weren't there, what would have happened to Alice?
Alice is very good at representing herself. But, there are certain things, like the very technical issues would be harder to address.
Plus, a lawyer is able to keep the court accountable and have them adhere to the tenant's rights.
Evidence is always being presented by a witness or, some sort of documentation. That's what evidence is. Evidence isn't what's coming out of my mouth. But there are plenty of courts that just allow the attorney to come in without their client and provide the evidence that way and then evict these tenants.
And in a place like Montgomery County, which saw a nearly 40% increase in eviction filings since the height of the pandemic, adding right to counsel to tenants' rights would make a difference. Deborah Levy is a senior attorney at ABLE. She shares what a right to counsel program would do for Dayton.
I think it was back in 2023, the filing rates, there were some studies done about filing rates across the country, and Dayton had the 5th highest eviction filing rate in the state. So yeah, there's a lot of cases, but what we do see when there are effective right to counsel programs is we see the filings going down.
And with filings going down, there may be more stable households, allowing tenants to focus on what really matters.
We were talking about why tenant protections is so important. And that's because it allows people to stay in one area, to even be able to build a sense of community.
We're back in the studio now. Hearns, being that right to counsel isn't established yet in Dayton, what can tenants do to help themselves if they don't have a lawyer like Alice did?
Yeah, both Deborah and Sarah and even Alice shared with me some simple solutions. First, be proactive and voice your concerns early. If you're in the same situation as Alice and you want to file for escrow, you need to first give the landlord a certified letter, which gives them 30 days to reply. So being early on stuff like that is important. Second, document. Document when you voice your concerns, document the pictures that you take of the conditions that you might be facing, and even document some stuff in writing so that you can present that to court. All of that stuff could help you in these hearings. But, after speaking with Alice, after speaking with the lawyers from ABLE, honestly, there's nothing that beats having a lawyer in the room, because not only do they remind the tenants of their rights, but they also hold the court accountable so that they could adhere to those rights as well.
Thanks for that, Hearns. Because you gave a lot of very detailed information and it might have been a lot to take in, just know that we're going to have that on our website at both cetconnect.org and thinktv.org.
Yes, we will.
All right, Hearns, we'll talk to you later for the takeaways.
Sounds good.
With this type of problem and the right to counsel solution, I'm sure you're wondering, what about the property owner in all of this? We agree. To gain that perspective, we go to President of the Dayton Real Estate Investors Association, Mike Fry, who's a landlord himself. He says communication is key with his tenants, so it doesn't get to the eviction stage.
I don't want residents to feel like they are at the bottom of the stack, and they understand that the housing provider is just as responsible and has just as many issues going on them that they do as residents.
One issue is the mortgage and the possible threat of foreclosure if the landlord is late paying the bank. If a tenant is having trouble paying the rent, Fry wants to know about it early on, before filing an eviction. In our conversations with Fry and other housing providers, they wouldn't dismiss right to counsel outright as a solution and say that they are still listening and learning about it as pilot programs like the one in Dayton take shape. One thought that many housing providers have is that more solutions need to be implemented upstream, whether it's proper communication, rental supports, or other tools that make sure it never gets to eviction.
Most housing providers do not want to have anything to do with evictions because evictions cost money. And they really would like to have a good resident who keeps the property clean and pays the rent.
Following our conversations with Fry, he said he's interested in creating a new education program for both the tenant and the landlord as one way to prevent evictions. As Dayton landlords learn more, we'll keep you updated on their perspectives. We've been exploring the potential for right to counsel so far in Dayton, but there are more cities who are actually doing it and making a big impact. When we come back on Brick by Brick, what Cleveland and Philadelphia are learning from their right to counsel initiatives. But first, let's keep it local. Up next, we'll explore what Cincinnati is doing with its own Access to Counsel program, how that compares, and what it would take for Cincy to get to right to counsel too.
We're talking about giving every tenant the opportunity to at least have representation for when they're having their at least one day in court. I think that actually can be done.
That's ahead on Brick by Brick.
Brick by Brick is made possible thanks to the generous support of so many, including Murray and Agnes Seasongood Good Government Foundation, Rosemary and Mark Schlachter, the Camden Foundation, Patty and Fred Heldman, Dee Dee and Gary West, the Stephen H. Wilder Foundation, Judith and Thomas Thompson, a donation in memory of Frank and Margaret Linhart, and more. Thank you. We couldn't do this work without you.
Hey, it's Hearns Laguerre Jr., one of the team members behind Brick by Brick. You know, our new show is about solutions for a thriving community. But if you think about it, we all have a different perspective of what a thriving community should look like. That's why we need to hear from you. We want to know what a thriving community looks like to you. Maybe it's more housing, more parks, or stores, or even safer sidewalks. Whatever your vision, we hope you'll share it with us. You can do that by heading to the Brick by Brick show page on ctconnect.org or thinktv.org. There you'll find an audience question button. Just fill out the survey and that's it. We look forward to sharing your hopes and dreams with the rest of our neighbors in future episodes. Thank you.
Welcome back to Brick by Brick. Cincinnati is scaling up access to counsel with more legal aid funding and rental assistance on the way. Access to counsel is different than right to counsel. Access to counsel is having access to a legal aid lawyer if there is one available, and frequently there aren't any, just too many people in need and too few attorneys. But access to counsel is more than Cincinnati had last year. It was passed by City Council in December and is just one piece of a Tenants' Bill of Rights that Cincinnati Councilmember Mika Owens has been working on.
When you have an attorney standing there with you to understand the legalese and everything that is happening in a court environment, whereas a layperson does not, it can make a difference in the outcome of that proceeding.
On the day Brick by Brick interviewed Councilmember Owens, she took part in an event put on by UC professor and attorney Nick Zingarelli, who runs the Help Center in Hamilton County. The Help Center is at the courthouse and offers free information for both tenants and landlords. Once a month, Zingarelli invites the public to witness eviction court and then debriefs them. Each hearing doesn't last very long.
It's lightning fast. These dockets happen twice a day at 9:30 and 10:30, Monday through Friday. A typical hearing will last 45 seconds.
Zingarelli agrees having an attorney makes all the difference and would like to see his law students step up in a right to counsel program so every eligible tenant has an attorney at least to represent them one day in court.
What it's going to take is investment in somebody that would be able to oversee that specific program and then getting student buy-in because students can represent people in court if they have a limited license and they're under the supervision of an attorney who can then watch over them during those proceedings.
As part of the city's research, Councilmember Owens contacted Cleveland to find out how right to counsel works there. So did Brick by Brick. Attorney Melanie Shakarian with the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland says the city has seen a drop in evictions, and she believes their right to counsel program, started in 2020, is one reason.
So last year, we helped 5,372 Cleveland residents who asserted a right to counsel in 1,470 housing cases.
To be eligible, renters must meet 100% of the federal poverty guidelines. For a family of 4, that's about $31,000, and have at least one child in the home. United Way of Greater Cleveland is a partner with Legal Aid on right to counsel. Ken Surratt says the program also helps uncover underlying issues, like how 83% of participants said they didn't pay rent because of bad conditions in the home.
Okay, well, if that's the issue, what do we need to do to address that? Is it code enforcement by the city, or is it lack of resources to make those home repairs?
Cleveland is looking into expanding its right to counsel program. Shakarian says studies show not only is it working, but it is saving the city money.
We're investing public and private dollars in this $3.5 million budget to allow people to have a right to counsel in eviction cases. And our independent evaluator estimated that Cleveland and Cuyahoga County likely realized a combined economic benefit between $11.8 million and $14 million.
In case you're counting, that's between a 300 and 400% return on investment for the city. Part of the challenge for them is getting the word out to those eligible to have an attorney. In 2022, Cleveland Legal Aid represented about 80% of those eligible. That's up from 60% in 2021. so they are seeing improvement as awareness grows. Cleveland isn't the only city with right to counsel. New York City was the first in 2017, followed by a handful of other places, including Philadelphia.
I'm Kadeem Morris. I'm the co-managing attorney of the housing unit here at Community Legal Services of Philadelphia. I'm in charge of the implementation of right to counsel for the city.
Kadeem Morris says arguably eviction rates are still horrible, but they were even worse before Philadelphia started right to counsel and a handful of other eviction prevention programs in 2022, including diversion.
We went from, I think, 20,000 to maybe 14,000 in the first full year since the diversion program started. And the numbers are still going down because the program works and people often need that support and not necessarily a court process.
Here's what the city has: rental assistance and mandatory mediation between the landlord and the tenant if the landlord wants to go through a court-ordered eviction. In addition, the city has a courtroom navigator if a renter just needs an attorney for a day, as well as right to counsel, which again means an attorney represents eligible residents for their entire eviction case. In Philadelphia, eligibility is based on zip code and income, with folks making up to 200% of the federal poverty level qualifying in certain zip codes. Morris considers right to counsel as just one tool in the toolkit and not a golden key to prevent evictions. He really likes the mandatory diversion program.
If we don't need to have a congested court system where it feels like you're being rushed, and if we don't need to send someone into that system unnecessarily just to ask for help, then that's a great intervention point that should happen. And I think that's the goal.
Here's something else. Philadelphia has also passed what it calls the Renters Access Act. It creates uniform screening criteria for applicants' rental and credit history. For example, before accepting an application, landlords have to provide the applicant with the written or electronic uniform screening criteria. It doesn't say they have to ignore all eviction records, but they also can't have a blanket exclusion policy against people who've been evicted. So that's another solution that could be layered in. Both Philadelphia and Cleveland say there was some pushback from landlords in the beginning, but with rental assistance available and a renter's attorney to speed up the case in court, many have come on board. Remember, if you're interested in learning more about Brick by Brick and want to read articles, hear the podcast, and see Hearns' video stories or online extras, go to cetconnect.org and thinktv.org. And while you're there, click on one of the big green buttons to give us some feedback or answer our current audience question. We'd love to hear from you. We're joined once again by Brick journalist Hearns Laguerre Jr. and a new member to our team, Amiko Moore. Welcome.
What's up?
Thank you so
and
much.
Just to tell you a little bit about her, Amiko is our multimedia journalist based in Dayton. For years, you've worked at NBC, writing and field producing stories that many of you may have seen on the nightly news, on the Today Show, and more. And we welcome again you to the studio.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here with both of you, and these last few weeks have been great. You've been so helpful.
Thank you. So, Amiko, this is the part of the show where we like to reflect on some of our takeaways from this solution story. You helped us with much of this reporting. Would you like to get us started this time?
Sure. We did do a lot of research on this.
What kind of resonated with you?
I think right to counsel, could be a long-term beneficial tool in preventing unnecessary evictions. We see a lot of evictions that are coming to these courts, and I think if tenants are better informed about what the laws and rules are, what are their rights and what are their responsibilities as a tenant too, they're better equipped to step into the courtroom and really kind of navigate that space, because they really don't know how do you present evidence? How do you know that? You can read about that. You can go somewhere and kind of study notes, but once you step into a courtroom, you're there. There's a way to talk to the magistrate. There's a way to talk to the lawyers. There's a way to present evidence. You need photographs. You don't need Post-it notes. You can't bring your phone in. So there's a lot of things that can help the tenant with their case and fight unfair evictions. And it helps, I think, the landlord as well, because it's going to make sure they're not going to take cases that aren't right, that shouldn't be there in the courts.
Deborah and Sarah was telling me from Able that
being that the landlord has a lawyer, and if the tenant were to have a lawyer too, most of the time they're able to speak maybe even before the hearings to possibly get us a resolution before the hearings actually start. So I think it's a program that could help all parties. On top of that, it can help the city save money too. Like, eviction costs everybody. So if we're able to avoid that, it saves the city money from not having to deal with the displaced families in the first place. And then, one other thing I wanted to mention was that we have to remember that right to counsel is a downstream solution, right? There's so many things upstream that could help, such as stable employment, rental assistance. These are all things that can help tenants handle costs so that they don't even get to eviction in the first place.
And I think that's definitely the landlord's prerogative too, to work everything out upstream. What kind of stuck out to me in this episode was there was just so much data. We realized that there are many sources that can help us get numbers. We were particularly looking to see if eviction numbers were declining. We needed to compare apples to apples. That was a little bit difficult. And we realized that if we had data more upstream, that might be more beneficial to people. In fact, Cincinnati, we're going to tell you about this maybe in an upcoming episode this summer, Cincinnati is going to use artificial intelligence to try to get some of that upstream information to keep people in their homes, because that is way cheaper to keep somebody in their homes rather than to get them rehoused.
Exactly.
Good comments, guys. Thanks for your input. Amico, we're really looking forward to your reporting.
Yeah, welcome to the team.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to doing more reporting with all of you.
Thanks, guys.
No problem.
Coming up on the next episode of Brick by Brick, how reducing the mandatory number of parking spaces required in new or old buildings can potentially impact our neighborhoods and our housing situation.
And now with no parking requirements, there should be no reason why we can't have more small businesses open up, more retail. There's just so much opportunity here.
But some communities worry about the effects of this part of Cincinnati's newly proposed zoning reforms.
We already have a good business district, the right balance, I think, of available parking. And this could flip things so that we don't have enough parking.
That's next time on Brick by Brick. That's our show. If you like what you hear, please rate and review our podcast. It helps making finding the pod a little easier. We hope you learned something, and if you did, please share it with your friends and family. For Hearns Laguerre Jr. and Amico Moore, I'm Ann Thompson. We'll be back soon with more solutions. Take care. Our show is produced, hosted, and edited by me, Ann Thompson, with reporting and story editing from Hearns Laguerre Jr. and Amico Moore. Our executive producer is Mark Lammers. Our show consultant is Gloria Skursky. Gabe Wimberly is our audio engineer and mixer. Zach Kramer runs the lights and cameras. Derek Smith is our production specialist, and Jason Garrison is our production manager. Kelly May heads up our marketing and promotions, along with Mike Shea and Bridget Dillenberger. Alyssa Stephenson handles the website, and Steve Wright is our designer. Bill Dean and Andreas Kruja are the engineers for the show, and our chief content officer is Colin Shenamblo. Our music is from Universal Production Music. Brick by Brick, Solutions for a Thriving Community is a production of CET and Think TV, Southwest Ohio PBS member stations.